Welcome to this episode of the People Dividend Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Horne, and I am delighted to have in the virtual studio today Michael Wenderoth, and that's Wenderoth. But all that aside, why am I delighted to have this author and executive coach with us today, and how do I think this conversation will inspire you, motivate you, help you think more deeply about what it means to be coached, what it means to be a coach, what it means to lead authentically. Here's a little bit about Michael Wenderoth. He poses a question, are you not getting ahead at work? He thinks that the real reason holding you back will surprise you. He's the award-winning author of Get Promoted, Stanford MBA. He's got some very provocative and hopefully evocative insights that have been featured in HBR. He challenges conventional wisdom by confronting the uncomfortable truth that embracing office politics and influence is essential to advancing your career. Michael's journey began more than a decade ago when a close friend who possessed every traditional marker of career success was dramatically fired, exposing the ruthless reality of power in politics and organizations. That wake-up call led Michael to rediscover the groundbreaking research of the Stanford professor Jeffrey Pfeffer, igniting his mission to help talented professionals master the hidden rules of company life. So drawing from sound research, years of experience as an executive coach, he's developed this breakthrough approach, the rock, the map, and the snowball. It's a practical framework that transforms how leaders influence and accelerate their careers. Michael Wenderoth, welcome to the People Dividend. Why don't you say a little bit about yourself? I mean, I can't do justice to all of this.
Well, Mike, first let me say I love your mission, which is mine as well, of creating better organizations through people, and the multiple purposes of your podcast, but particularly provoking thought. And so I want to have a thoughtful discussion with you here, conversation to benefit listeners. So thank you for that introduction. Just a little bit about myself, and this will go to the point around coaching, right? Coaching is not about us. It is about our clients. And so I would actually say to know me and why, what I do is really, if we turn this around and if people out there are listening and they feel like at work, that other people seem to be operating by a playbook that they never got, right? And so those other people seem to be getting ahead. Those other people seem to be having outsized influence or having more of an impact. Essentially, if you find yourself saying that, I'm an executive coach who focuses on that area that helps people navigate what I really call hard realities about organizational life and, being exposed and mastering that playbook. And so that's what I've dedicated my coaching to. By way of very kind of quick background, I came into coaching, 7-8 years ago now, after a 20-year corporate career. I was around the world, actually more of it outside the U.S. than inside. China, Silicon Valley in the U.S., and in Europe, bringing breakthroughs to market. And that did two things. And I think, one of them is to the point of this podcast, which is people, when they work together, when there's a team, you can achieve amazing things. And, breakthroughs, I brought Invisalign, invisible dental braces around the world, family hospitals in China. So I saw that happen. But there was this other part, and we can talk about the stories and get into this, some of those moments where I saw really excellent people, these ones that we want in the C-suite, we want as our leaders, right? Smart, hardworking, team players, all of those qualities, get sidelined. While, we can talk also too about kind of less savory people seem to be operating by this other playbook. And so that launched me into really, why was that happening? Why were good people not getting ahead? Particularly when they felt like, to get ahead, you seem to have to do things that are, going against my values, unsavory, becoming someone that I'm not, that's not authentically me. And so helping them through that to help good people get ahead and, get into positions and have influence in their organization, so we get the type of organizations that, this podcast is dedicated to. So that's, about me and why I'm here and why we're talking.
Well, it's so great and really wonderful, Michael Wenderoth, that you're able to bring those perspectives and experiences to client situations and to coaching. I love what you have to say about politics. And one of my dear colleagues, Peter Block, made this observation, many years ago, that you have to embrace politics in organizational life. That it's not about sitting on the fence. It's about taking a position, having a view. All of us have bias, and bringing that. And I think that was in maybe a book called Positive Political Skills at Work or The Empowered Manager. And I think Peter later extended those ideas in all of his work on community and stewardship, because in a community, he says, people have to stand up. They have to be accounted for. So even in all his facilitation work, people always rise to their feet when they speak. It's this idea of being heard and counted. And what led you to that insight around positive political skills at work and embracing office politics?
Well, it is this, this story, and I share this kind of seminal moment that I saw in my corporate career when, a friend, I'm going to call him Matt, that's not his real name, had all those markers that you were referring to in the introduction. And he called me and he said, I've just been ousted. There was a power play that went around me. And, when you feel that, right, you feel things are unfair. You feel like you've done all the things. And he said this, and, and then you take it out in the other areas of your life, that frustration. And when we kind of dug into that, right, there was, to kind of fast forward, kind of an inattention to politics. He was a very heads down hard worker, not seeing the way winds were shifting, not building alliances with, when you get to his level, you've got to sometimes operate with people that you may not see eye to eye with. In fact, organizations are kind of set up in that way. And so, in some ways, it's not to say it's all his fault, but he did himself a disservice by shying away for some of these things that are really essential. And then the research, and that's this part that I really went into, is like, why is this happening to certain people, right? When you reach a certain level, you're no longer an individual contributor, and you've got to work through other people. And so this aspect of the interpersonal, the political skills, and as soon as you say political, right, there's a lot of negative connotations that are associated with that. And it causes people to dismiss them. I'm, not going to go have lunch with certain people, or it looks like I'm currying favor with someone. And so, that was very apparent that Matt was not doing. And had he added those, he's a strong performer, team player, self-effacing. Had he done those additional things, he would have, one, protected himself, but two, he probably would have navigated things with more savvy, enabling him to bring a lot of the good things he wanted, to the organization. Instead, he's on the sideline. He's ousted. It's a rough place to be. And so that's where, the research combined with, seeing that also repeatedly, really helped me come to say, this is an essential skill that people cannot put their head in the sand in.
So interesting, Michael. I've been on, I've observed a number of employment terminations, not only observed, I mean, I've facilitated employment terminations, I've led them, ranging from terminations without cause, I mean, more conventionally, we refer to that as a layoff. But I've, led those, unfortunately, in one organization, a 10,000 person layoff. I've been on the other end of it, as a team leader, as a person who managed people. One of the most heart-wrenching terminations I ever did was with a a woman on my team who was in an abusive relationship, just could not get out of it, and how it impacted her performance, and no amount of intervention or help seemed to work. And it was just awful. And, I've negotiated so many executive departures and what those look like and how long some of them last and what the payout terms are. And so I've seen it from a number of perspectives. And one thing that's true is, employment contracts are broken more or less, right? I mean, there's not much loyalty. So I think when you're describing that situation, we're really talking about people who are in professional services firms, lawyers, consultants, or executives, high-ranking executives in organizations. How do we, for the everyday person in an organization who, unfortunately has no chance to negotiate anything once they're given, notice, whether for cause or not for cause. I mean, we really can't negotiate anything in most corporations. And certainly it seems that what's playing out perhaps in the public sector also affects this. So how do we take those lessons and, have a broad application of them? Because I think it's such an important topic about get promoted. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I think, first of all, just accepting some of the reality of how organizations, I mean, what we aspire to, right, and I would say are unicorns, these organizations that are very transparent, people can show vulnerability, people can be their authentic selves. That doesn't exist in most places, right? High trust environments. And so I say you have to kind of accept that there is reality. And I think most people, and it's a very practical thing that I think everyone out there could do right now, is look at your organization and, who is being promoted, who is being elevated, who is being ousted. I mean, go back and look at the last year, right? You could do this before you come in. You could do this as you think about why you got passed over this past year. And that simple exercise, it's one of the things that I put in my book, tells you what the organization promotes and values. Because organizations will say a lot of things, but we know what kind of, elevates certain people, how certain people get into certain positions often is very different, right? Who you're connected to, how you show up, certain things. And so I would say, first of all, people should look at the landscape of what it looks like and accept some of this reality that, it's maybe not perfect. And then to be very proactive, essentially be agents, take care of yourself. I do think there is less loyalty now. And to say, first of all, given what you see, is this a place, right, that you can grow, right? A plant will grow in certain environments. In certain places, the soil's not great, the positioning's not great. You might eventually be better off somewhere else. But to kind of go into that seeing reality, potential landmines, pockets where that aligns with your values or things that you want to do. And so I would say, my point blank there is to be aware and to kind of do an x-ray of the environment that you're going into.
Yeah, so helpful.
Is one thing that helps people position themselves much better and think about what do they need to do and how much do they want to share about themselves? How much, trust will they have going into environments?
And I think there's an interesting flow in this. I have the privilege, good fortune of working with founders, CEOs, leaders in the C-suite, and primarily scientists, technologists, and engineers. And most of these people are very accomplished people. And I'm often, I'm brought in by the board of directors or by the chief human resources officer to work with these founders or C-suite members, many of whom might describe them as intellectual bullies or, really horrible interpersonal kinds of behaviors. It doesn't mean that they're not creative. It doesn't mean that they're not brilliant. It doesn't mean that they can't collaborate, because most scientific and engineering endeavors happen through collaboration. But I mean, really difficult people with whom to work. What do you do in that case? I mean, politics really sort of don't matter.
Yeah, I think there is an attention to to understanding a big part of what I do, this is an influence also from Jeff Pfeffer, who I coached a lot during his courses, and he's influenced me a lot, is to pay attention to power dynamics.
Yeah.
Right? And we can say the world is flat and organizations are flat, but there are pockets of power, those people who control resources. You don't promote yourself, someone else does. And I think that takes a very savvy individual to understand how you will navigate some of those challenging personalities, right? Those, understanding what's in their agenda, understanding what things motivate them or are important to them, understanding their hot buttons. And this can also go down. I mean, one of the number one things you need to do early on is to understand your boss, right? And, if the boss is a blocker, is, out there promoting themselves or not giving you credit, you have to think about how you build a base and be known kind of around that. It can be tricky, right? And this is one of the challenging things. And I would say that is a version of politics, right? If we think about politics kind of in a very more expansive way. But yeah, I think it's incumbent too to how do we get kind of these good qualities, our leaders to adopt them, or get, those who want to change organizations, think about how do we adopt some of those things so it's not just dominated by certain individuals who tend to promote the things that they value or see in themselves. Yeah.
So interesting to think about this. In my most recent book, The People Dividend, Leadership Strategies for Unlocking Potential, I talk about one of the reasons why I wrote the book is because I think there are so many people in organizations who feel just like a cog in the wheel, that despite good performance, stellar performance, despite weekly meetings with their boss, check-ins, their bosses really aren't interested because their bosses are managing their own careers. And that's part of the reason I wrote The People Dividend, to focus on a couple things that are happening. One thing in human resources in organizations in 2025 is that it looks a lot like the recent past. Organizations are still struggling with the post-COVID environment. So HR in 2023 was a lot like HR in 2025. I mean, still struggling with these issues about remote work, the permanence of remote work, whether people need to be in an office to contribute to culture of an organization. We also have the lowest engagement record on record in the U.S., according to Gallup, the lowest engagement. We also have people who are really not participating in organizations as, I understood them sort of growing up in the era of Rosabeth Moss Kanter and Men and Women of the Corporation, but to really now think about people put their lives together in the gig economy, and there's going to be an increasing use of that. So that's my argument about why we need three essential things in management and leadership to survive in this new era, the modern era of work that deals with all of these issues, plus the increasing use of artificial intelligence in HR and other systems and organizations, is we need a new era of dignity, kindness, and respect. And these are the humanistic values that sort of drive things, but I think they're going to make the difference. What are the kinds of skills and values that you're working on now with maybe in your power map? You can talk about that. How's that a key to advancing careers? Why do these concepts, do you think these concepts of dignity, kindness, and respect get people promoted?
I'd say that's very much to the previous point we were talking about, is it depends on the organization. And so I'd say those organizations, they're rare. And so I admire the work that you do and what you've contributed there, Mike. But there's where, I would challenge people to really look at the organizations and say, is this organization living those values? Because you kind of know what you're going into. And I think that's if you're going in with too much of a, rose-tinted glasses, you can actually short-circuit your career there early, right? You showing dignity or vulnerability, and that gets turned around and used against you later on. I have seen this repeatedly. And so being very cautious, scanning the environment, And you'll see that, right, when you the tool, right, that I highlight in my book, the power map, is diagnosing where power sits and how those individuals or pockets, promote, operate the values they represent. And so while I'd say those are aspirational values, they're rare. They're rare. And, if you do want to kind of get ahead and change some of that, well, you need power. You need influence. And it's not to say it's all positional. I do believe that a lot of power is positional. But in order to do that, you've got to find ways to build alliances or shift certain people. You need to be able to get resources. You need to be able to get in certain positions where you can change policy, and set the example. And so I think we're talking largely on the same thing. I kind of do look at this from, those who are kind of trying to operate and make the organization better. Although I do get a lot of organizations come to me and say, hey, you understand kind of where our biases are, things that we're overlooking, how people have to navigate things. So they do come in and ask me to speak or consult, or even to say, hey, this is a very typical run. An SVP will have a VP under them or a director and say, I want this individual to navigate better. This is a pretty rough place, but they're missing certain things around presence or leaning in. And so I think we want those organizations, but the sad reality is that most organizations aren't that. And, it is a tough world out there where, yes, we can do the gig economy, shift places. AI is coming. And so I, very much say people should take care of themselves, both to help themselves and their organizations.
Yeah, so true. I mean, around positional power in organizations and hierarchy in organizations, all true. And many of the people that I work with, they earn their power through expert power. If we were to define it in like the French and Raven and the old models of social power, most of them have earned their power through expertise. I mean, they're experts in their field. They've demonstrated certain competence, and probably very few of them, despite being ambitious people, aspired to, I'm going to be the executive vice president. But yet they had enough, there were enough, there was enough expertise, and we've known for a long time that promoting people based on their technical expertise doesn't qualify for great leadership, but it's unfortunate the way the world still works. So I'm influenced as a humanist, as someone who's a proponent of humanistic values in the workplace, and for leaders to embody those. I'm a big proponent in, not seeing power as a divisible pie, something you section pieces of, but seeing it as an expandable pie. And I think that's what creates our room for innovation in organizations. The only thing that really keeps anything going. It's about, how to really be, to take the diversity around you, to be inclusive of it, that produces scientific, technical breakthroughs. And I think then, I want to get to the rock, the map, and the snowball. How do people get unstuck?
Yeah. So, and we've touched on this. I mean, the rock, the map, and the snowball, which is the framework, right, by which I coach a lot of people, and the book that I've written, Get Promoted. But essentially, if you think about the rock, the map, and the snowball, the rock is to get real, the map is to get strategic, and the snowball is to get doing. And by that, the rock is this hard reality that we've talked about, right? Carl Sagan said, better the hard truth than a comforting fantasy. Build what your strategy is based on things that work. There's very good social science evidence, right? People are very irrational. Organizations are very irrational, but in very predictable ways. And then the map, which is to say, what does the landscape look like? This point that we talked about, that we talked about before, of what's being valued. What do things look like? Because yes, you can have a North Star, and we want to get to those aspirational values. But if you're not thinking about how to get things done, right? I was a project manager. I led a lot of organizations. You have to think about where the landmines, where the shortcuts. And so if you lay that out, and the power map is a very central part of that, you think about where you spend your time. You think about who has power, whether that is, to your point, expertise power, relational power. etc. And then this last part, which really goes to coaching, the snowball, right? Nothing happens unless something moves, to quote Einstein. And that is about doing things. And this is where it's very difficult, right? If people are framing power and politics in a negative way, or they've had it used against them. So, I'm going to have to embrace that. Well, if you get them to reframe it, right? Power is actually just a neutral force. Like you say, it can be expansive. And so, yeah, it's fire, right? You could burn a place down, but you could also power a village, feed people. And so doing is to think about, hey, how you might reframe your relationship with power and politics and actually do things. I kind of call it doing little experiments, right? And we can have a conversation about authenticity. A lot of people will sometimes say, well, that's not who I am, or I'm a data guy, or I'm an engineer, or I speak truth to power. Well, there's certain times where the situation, you want to be savvy about that. And the snowball is about get things moving by doing. And I'm a big fan of saying, I also spent a lot of my career in design thinking, action will drive insight, sometimes not always the other way around. So that rock, map, and snowball is a compact framework for thinking about how you get things moving in your organization and in your career.
So true. And I keep thinking about how do we create environments that, where fear is reduced. The recently deceased British social philosopher Charles Handy stated that the most insecurity is produced by the belief that you have a secure job. It causes great insecurity if you believe that you have a secure job. And, others have talked about fear holding people back. Look, so many of the folks that I coach, are fearful of stepping into their potential, of, engaging in a conversation. They spend hours worrying about, should I talk to this person or not talk to this person?
Yep.
How will it appear? And for me, and I think it grows out of the environments and many of the environments in which I coach, is I tell my clients is that, life is not a science experiment, but rather, to your point, Michael Wenderoth, is how do we get people to be experimental in their approaches and, run these experiments as they think about more meaningful and rich ways in which they can connect with others and lead their organizations to greatness. Yesterday, I was thinking about my earliest mentor, which is a guy named Warren Bennis, who wrote a lot about leadership. And, a number of New York Times best-selling books. And I think what Warren was known for at the time, this is a long time ago, was the rise of the celebrity CEO, because he would profile these CEOs and talk about it. Also a colleague probably of Jeffrey Pfeffer's. But Warren, at his most cynical, would say that, on the topic of leadership, never has so much been written about so little. And there is some truth to that, I think, because when we can get people into, an integrity spot that creates trust, the subject of my, first book, Integrity by Design, we know that when people have some congruency, internal congruency, that, their words and actions, and better yet, their thoughts, words, and actions match, then they feel a sense of alignment and people experience a whole cloth around them. And that, leads to trust. People ask me, well, is it okay to tell a lie? Well, you do whatever you want. But what I know is that once trust diminishes, it's very difficult to get it back.
Yeah.
So how do we do that in this politics-fueled environment? How do we work on these issues of trust, which I think, like you, we believe. I mean, if I trust you, I'm more likely to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. You have no disagreement from me that high trust environments are the optimal, and a lot of research there that shows that they are the most effective organizations. However, again, to my point, they are very rare. Okay. And you get, toxic environments, low trust, jockeying, backstabbing, all these things that we associate the negative of power and politics. And again, I take a very realpolitik, approach on this. I think you've got to, one, decide, right, is this a place I can change, right? I'm a fan of saying you can change almost anything, but is it worth the effort? And so for some people, that's like, let me go, instead of to this law firm, over to this one that's going to be more hospitable to me. But the part is, when you are in a place, is to, I'm not a fan of saying, trust blindly, right? To temper your trust, to look for pockets to start to build trust. And then as you see that reciprocated, you kind of open up and expand the trust, right? The vulnerability, all these good qualities. But you need to be very careful of, and this is where I think authenticity sometimes gets overused, right? Like, I'm going to speak truth to power. I'm going to share vulnerability. That gets turned around and gets used against you. This person never wanted that promotion. So I'd say, to take a step-by-step approach, to be very pragmatic. Again, we have more power than we think, right? In your
For
organization,
sure.
right? On your teams, the way you run a meeting, right? The loudest person, are they always going to get their way? Are they going to create groupthink? Hey, you can do certain things in terms of how you structure that meeting. And that starts to build the team. However, right, if you're in a large organization, you've got to think, particularly if you're the leader of that, how do you kind of manage up? How do you navigate kind of these other, fiefdoms that may exist? So not easy. I think we've kind of started the conversation on this, but I think, again, it's that worthy goal, but taking a hard look at some of these organizations. And I think sometimes people stay too long in toxic places. And so I am also a fan of saying, hey, if that's not working for you, always think about where else you'll be valued or where you can go. Kind of take care of your career.
Yeah, so important to think about how to direct the significance of your life, and what that means in terms of career, and thinking about how you manage and how well you manage all the transitions that occur in life. And you can learn more about Michael Wenderoth. Visit him at changwenderoth.com, CHANG Wenderoth.com. We'll have it all in the show notes for you. Also see him on LinkedIn. And Michael, any other suggestions on how people might be in touch with you?
Yeah, I'd say my website is the number one. My book, Get Promoted, people can also come to my website and get the first chapters for free. I'm looking forward to having you, Mike, at some point on my podcast,
Oh, great.
97% Effective. We focus on power and influence, kind of these hard truths, how to navigate them, how to master that with that ultimate goal of creating better organizations. So that's how people can reach me and, do the good work that you and I talk about.
That's great. If you were to offer, in closing, one piece of advice to our listeners, to our HR leaders, our those who help organizations and leaders perform better, what would that piece of advice or guidance? Advice might be too heavy of a bar, but what would the piece of guidance be? Something, a powerful consideration.
It is something I say a lot, right? It has to do with being less judgmental. But I think that the thing that people will remember is, when you are furious, first get curious. So when you see injustice or things happening in your organization that you cannot believe, right? Sit back and kind of diagnose what's going on. And we know this from coaching, whole person coaching, right? When you are in a curious brain mindset, you become more creative, expansive in terms of how you think about things, versus being very kind of judgmental and thinking kind of in very narrow frames. You're not always going to love what you see, but I think it helps you pull back, scan and look at the environment, and then be able to flex and to take on kind of what you see in a much more creative and productive way. That's what
Wow,
I would say.
so great. Stay curious. It's been great to be in conversation with you, Michael, author of Get Promoted. And I really thank you for sharing all of your experiences. So thank you.
Mike, absolute pleasure.
Yeah, and until the next episode of the People Dividend, stay well.